Your parents didn't always know what you were listening to, but when they did, certain songs came off the turntable fast. The 1970s were full of music that parents banned, radio stations censored, and governments tried to bury. These are the 10 forbidden songs from 1970s you weren't allowed to play as a kid. Number 10. Lola by the Kinks. Lola was released by the Kinks in June 1970 and told the story of a young man who falls for a woman he meets at a Soho nightclub and realizes, gradually, that she is a transgender woman. Ray Davies wrote it, and the song handled the subject with more warmth and genuine humanity than almost anything else on the charts at that time. It was a genuine crossover hit, reaching number 2 in the UK and number 9 on the US Billboard Hot 100. The BBC banned it, not for the transgender subject matter, but because a lyric mentioned Coca-Cola by name. The BBC's broadcasting guidelines strictly prohibited what they classified as commercial endorsement, and Coca-Cola was too clear and prominent a brand reference to overlook. Davies flew from a North American tour back to London specifically to re-record the line, substituting Cherry Cola for the original before the song could be aired on British radio. The re-recorded version became the standard release and is the one most people know today. There were also groups in the United States who objected to the song's treatment of gender, and some stations in more conservative markets declined to play it on those grounds. The combination of even a temporary BBC ban, though resolved through the re-recording of a single word, and American conservative pushback gave Lola a reputation that accompanied it through the decade and into subsequent reissues.
Girls will be boys and boys will be girls, it's a mix.
For anyone whose parents caught them playing it, the subject matter was more than enough to declare the song off-limits, regardless of which version was on the record. The Kinks had built their career on songs that took aim at English social life with a sharp-eyed affection. And Lola was no exception. It was genuinely sympathetic to its subject, at a time when mainstream popular music rarely acknowledged that its subjects existed at all. Number 9. Brown Sugar by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones released Brown Sugar in April 1971 as the lead single from Sticky Fingers, and it went to number 1 in both the United Kingdom and the United States. Mick Jagger wrote the lyrics in a single session at the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio in Alabama in December 1969, and the song moves through multiple layers of uncomfortable subject matter in its 3.5 minutes: slavery, sexual violence, interracial relationships, and heroin use, delivered over a rolling, horn-driven riff that made it immediately irresistible on radio. Several American radio stations refused to play it outright, particularly in the South, where the combination of the song's lyrical references to slavery and interracial sex made it a record that station managers felt they could not broadcast without generating serious listener complaints. Others played it in an edited form that removed or reduced the most direct references. The song charted at the top anyway, because enough stations played it to generate the sales and airplay numbers that drove it there. Charlie Watts played the drums on the recording. Bobby Keys played the saxophone solo that runs through the track's second half, one of the most instantly recognizable saxophone performances in rock history. The recording was made during the same Muscle Shoals session that produced several other Sticky Fingers tracks, and the atmosphere of the Deep South studio fed into the lyrical content Jagger was developing. In later years, Jagger himself has expressed discomfort with the song's lyrical content. He told Rolling Stone in 2020 that he wouldn't write it today and that he was embarrassed by some of what it contained. Keith Richards publicly disagreed, arguing that the song should remain available and that sanitizing rock history served no purpose. The song has been in heavy classic rock rotation for over 50 years, but it spent a long time as the kind of record that a teenager turned down quickly if a parent walked past the door. Number 8. Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed.
Take a walk on the wild side.
Lou Reed released Walk on the Wild Side in November 1972 from his album Transformer, which was produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson, while Bowie was at the height of his Ziggy Stardust period. The song is a character study, moving through portraits of several individuals from Andy Warhol's factory scene in New York: Holly Woodlawn, Candy Darling, Joe D'Alessandro, Jackie Curtis, and Joe Campbell, known as Sugar Plum Fairy, each introduced in a verse that describes their journey to New York and the life they built there. The backing arrangement was anchored by Herbie Flowers, who played both a standard electric bass and a double bass simultaneously, creating the distinctive two-layer sound that runs through the recording.
Hey, good looking. Take a walk on the wild side.
The BBC banned it. The stated reason was a lyric in one of the verses referring to oral sex, delivered in plain and unmistakable English. What makes the ban interesting in retrospect is how much the BBC appears to have missed while focusing on that specific line. The song's references to methamphetamine use, the transgender identities of Holly and Candy, and the overall portrait of the underground world Warhol had assembled in his Union Square studio were all present and clear. But the ban was issued on the basis of one specific line, suggesting that someone at the BBC had read carefully up to that point, and perhaps less carefully thereafter. In the United States, the song received substantial FM radio airplay despite its content. Progressive FM rock radio in the early 1970s was operating with considerably more latitude than AM stations, or the BBC, and Walk on the Wild Side found an audience through that channel. It reached number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the most commercially successful recordings of Reed's solo career. He has said in interviews that he was genuinely surprised by how much airplay the song received, given how directly it communicated what it was about.
Take a walk on the wild side.
Number 7. Hi 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 by Wings. Paul McCartney and Wings released Hi 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 as a double A-side single with Sea Moon in December 1972. The BBC banned it almost immediately on two separate grounds. The lyric, "We're gonna get high, high, high," was taken as a direct reference to drug use, and a separate line in the verse was interpreted as sexually explicit. McCartney responded publicly that the BBC had misheard the lyric in question, which he said was about a polygon rather than anything anatomically suggestive. The BBC was not persuaded, and the ban stood. The double A-side structure of the single created an unusual commercial situation. Sea Moon, the song on the other side, had no content objections and received full BBC radio airplay, appearing on chart shows and daytime programming without restriction. Hi 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 was kept entirely off BBC radio, while its counterpart on the same physical single was being played regularly. The two songs appeared together on the charts, both benefiting from the same physical sales, but only one of them receiving broadcast support from the dominant British broadcaster. McCartney had spent years navigating the BBC's content decisions. Several Beatles recordings had been banned for drug references, political content, or lyrical ambiguity during the 1960s, and by 1972 he understood the process. Hi 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 was his first significant post-Beatles BBC ban as a solo performer. Despite the radio restriction, the song reached number 5 on the UK singles chart, driven by physical sales alone, and number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States, where the ban did not apply. It remains one of the stronger single-era Wings recordings, and one that demonstrates how effectively the BBC's bans could be circumvented by an artist with enough commercial momentum to sell records without airplay. Number 6. School's Out by Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper released School's Out in May 1972 as the lead single from the album of the same name, and it went to number 1 in the UK and number 7 in the United States. The song celebrated the end of the school year with a theatrical enthusiasm and a mock-destructive energy, that made it immediately beloved by anyone under the age of 18 and deeply suspicious to most people over it. Alice Cooper. The name was the band's collective stage identity at the time, with lead singer Vincent Damon Fournier using it before eventually adopting it as his legal name, had built a stage show around theatrical shock imagery that was unlike anything British or American mainstream audiences had previously seen in rock performance. The set included guillotines, straitjackets, mock executions, fake blood, and a live boa constrictor. By the time School's Out was released, the band's reputation had preceded them considerably. Mary Whitehouse, the British moral campaigner who spent the better part of the 1970s fighting broadcasters and entertainment industry figures over content she considered harmful to public decency, targeted Alice Cooper's stage show as part of her ongoing campaign. She objected to what she described as the glorification of violence and the corrupting influence of the imagery on young audiences. School's Out, with its subject matter touching on institutional destruction and anarchic celebration, was cited as part of that argument. The BBC did not formally ban the song, but it received considerably less BBC radio airplay relative to its chart performance than a #1 hit would typically expect. The chart position was driven substantially by physical sales. In American households, parents who had seen coverage of the band's stage show, or who simply objected to a song about school being blown up as a concept worth celebrating, had ample reason to disapprove. It remains one of the most immediately recognizable rock songs of the decade. Number 5. My Ding-a-Ling by Chuck Berry.
She told me it was my ding-a-ling-a-ling-o.
Chuck Berry recorded My Ding-a-Ling at a live performance at the Lanchester Arts Festival in Coventry, England in January 1972. The song, a novelty piece built around a sustained double entendre between a children's toy and the male anatomy, had actually existed in various versions since the early 1950s. Berry himself had recorded an earlier version called My Tambourine in 1968, and the concept dated back even further to a recording by Dave Bartholomew. Berry's 1972 live recording, captured during a performance where he worked the audience through the joke with visible enjoyment, went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in October 1972, his first and only U.S. #1 after a career that had included foundational rock and roll hits stretching back 17 years, and also reached #1 in the UK.
Catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling-o.
Mary Whitehouse launched a direct campaign to have the song banned from British radio, writing to the BBC and arguing that its content was inappropriate for broadcast, particularly during the daytime hours when children were most likely to be listening. The BBC's response was to decline a formal ban, choosing instead to note that the song's humor was of the double entendre variety that British broadcasting had historically been somewhat more tolerant of than American equivalents. The resulting controversy over Whitehouse's campaign became a news story in its own right, with newspapers covering her objections and the BBC's reluctance to act on them, in effect giving the song far more column inches than a straightforward radio playlist entry would have generated. For children who heard it and immediately understood the joke, which most did, it was exactly the type of record that existed precisely because adults didn't entirely want it to. For parents who caught on, it was the kind of record that quietly disappeared from the house.
She told me it was my ding-a-ling-a-ling-o.
Number 4. Kodachrome by Paul Simon. Paul Simon released Kodachrome in April 1973 from his album There Goes Rhymin' Simon, and it reached #2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The BBC refused to play it. The reason was straightforward. The song's title referenced Kodachrome, a trademarked brand of photographic film manufactured by Eastman Kodak. The BBC's long-standing rules against commercial product endorsement prohibited playing songs that named specific brands, regardless of the context or whether the naming was complimentary or critical. Eastman Kodak itself reportedly did not object to the song. Simon used the film's vivid color rendering as a metaphor for the romanticizing power of memory. The way that looking back at a mediocre education and lackluster youth can seem brighter in recollection than it was in reality. The lyric was not an advertisement and was not intended as one. But the BBC's rules applied regardless of intent, and Kodachrome was kept entirely off BBC radio for the duration of its chart run. Simon had already encountered BBC rules with a different song. Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard had run into issues for a reference to Newsweek magazine in its lyrics, for the same brand naming reason. He was not the first or the last American artist to discover that a song could be commercially dominant in the United States while receiving no BBC airplay whatsoever because of a word in the title. In the United States, Kodachrome was played constantly through the spring and summer of 1973. American listeners heard it in regular rotation on AM and FM radio alike. British listeners could buy the single in shops and hear about it in the music press, but were unable to encounter it through broadcast media for the entire period of its chart relevance. It is one of the stranger stories in the history of radio censorship. A song kept off the air not for its content, not for its politics, not for its morality, but because its title was a registered trademark. Number 3. Love to Love You Baby by Donna Summer. Donna Summer recorded Love to Love You Baby in Munich in 1975 with producers Giorgio Moroder and Pete Bellotte. Summer recorded the extended vocal take alone in a darkened studio, a deliberate production choice designed to help her feel less inhibited during the session. What she delivered was a performance built around extended simulated sexual sounds across 17 minutes in the album version, with a considerably shorter edit prepared as a commercial single for radio play. The BBC banned it without much deliberation. Neil Bogart, the president of Casablanca Records, had played the extended version at a party he was hosting in Los Angeles. And the reaction from the guests was enthusiastic enough that he called Moroder from the party and asked for as much of the song as they could produce. The resulting 17-minute version was what Moroder sent him. Time magazine described it as a 17-minute orgasm, in a review that captured both what made it remarkable and what made it unbearable to conservative broadcasters. In the United States, most radio stations played the considerably shorter edited single version, which gave the song enough airplay to reach number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, while keeping its most extended and explicit elements largely confined to the album format and the homes of people who had bought the full record. Summer's grandmother, upon hearing the song for the first time, reportedly declared she would never be able to go to church again. Summer went on to become one of the defining voices of the disco era and one of the best-selling artists of the late 1970s. Love to Love You Baby was the recording that started all of it, and the one that no teenager played anywhere near a parent. Number 2. Anarchy in the UK by the Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols released Anarchy in the UK in November 1976 on EMI Records, and the BBC banned it. The song was a direct assault on British institutions, delivered with a vocal style and production approach that had almost no precedent in what had been on commercial radio up to that point. It reached number 38 on the UK singles chart, despite virtually no BBC radio airplay, a chart position driven entirely by independent record shop sales in specialist punk and youth culture outlets. EMI dropped the band in January 1977, just weeks after Anarchy in the UK was released, following pressure on the company from within the entertainment industry and the press fallout from the television appearance that had generated national headlines. A&M Records signed the band in March 1977 and almost immediately dropped them as well, after objections from other artists on the label's roster. Virgin Records eventually signed them and released God Save the Queen that May. The ban on Anarchy in the UK came in the context of a broader public reaction to the band that was building throughout the final months of 1976. A television appearance on Thames Television's Today program in December 1976 in which the Pistols and members of their entourage used profanity on live broadcast in response to interviewer Bill Grundy's provocations, resulted in front-page coverage across British newspapers the following day and a level of national attention that no BBC radio rotation could have created independently. The tabloids called it the filthiest show in the history of television. The BBC ban, in that context, was just one element of a much larger wave of institutional disapproval. For teenagers in Britain in 1976, anarchy in the UK was a record unlike anything they had encountered. It was not offensive in the ways their parents had been prepared to recognize. It didn't traffic in obvious sexuality or drug references. It was simply and completely contemptuous of every institution the adults around them respected, delivered at volume, and written off the radio. Number 1. God Save the Queen by the Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols released God Save the Queen in May 1977, timed to coincide with Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, the national celebration of the 25th anniversary of her accession to the throne. The BBC banned it immediately and comprehensively. The Independent Broadcasting Authority instructed all commercial radio stations to do the same. Almost no mainstream British radio outlet played the song during the period of its release. Despite the total mainstream radio blackout, God Save the Queen sold enough copies through independent retail channels to reach number 2 on the UK singles chart for the week of June 11, 1977, the precise week of the Jubilee itself. Many people believed, and some industry insiders later confirmed, that the chart return had actually placed the song at number 1, but that the chart had been manipulated to prevent a song titled God Save the Queen from appearing at the top of the British pop chart during the Jubilee week. The official number 1 that week was Rod Stewart's I Don't Want to Talk About It. The song was played on pirate radio stations, in clubs, and on cassette tapes passed between teenagers across Britain. The physical media of the era, cassette tapes that could be copied and passed without any broadcasting infrastructure, was what made the song's genuine reach impossible for the BBC to control, no matter how effectively it blocked the airwaves. Parents who discovered it in their children's possession in the summer of 1977 were dealing with something genuinely unprecedented, a record that everyone was talking about and virtually no radio station would play. If any of these brought back the memory of hiding a record under the bed or turning the volume down the second a parent walked in, drop it in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. There's more where this came from.